Thank you. So I'm going to share with you some very preliminary results about differences in the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic by personality traits. I will talk about mental health as well, of course. This is joint work with Wendy Bruder-Brun and Tay Wassel. The motivation is pretty straightforward. There exists a very large literature in psychology documenting that the big 5 personality traits, which are openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, play an important role in shaping life experiences and responses to stressors. So we believe that there could be an effect in how personality traits affect the response to the unprecedented events that we are witnessing. Also, the big 5 personality traits are associated with outcomes that could be of particular interest if you focus on the pandemic. And these are health and well-being, mental health, of course, mindfulness, coping more generally. So our research question is, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, to what extent did the big 5 personality traits drive differences across individuals in risk perceptions, in adoption of protective behaviors, adoption of coping behaviors, and eventually mental health? Given the existing body of work, we do have priors or expectations about how some of these relationships may look like in the data. For instance, we expect individuals who score high in neuroticism to have higher perception of risk, both health and economic risk. And also individuals who score high in neuroticism to have worse mental health, or probably to respond differentially to the events of the pandemic. Recently, we have also learned that there are some theoretical priors or anecdotal evidence linking the big 5 personality traits to the adoption of protective behaviors. In the article I'm citing here, the authors claim that people who score high in agreeableness, in openness and extraversion are more likely to adopt protective behaviors, particularly to maintain social distancing. We tackle all these questions empirically at trying to test whether our priors or expectations are holding the data and comprehensively given the data at our disposal. Speaking of which, we use the longitudinal data from the UAS COVID survey and exploit the rich background information that we have about UAS respondents. Among other things, we observe the big 5 personality traits. We relate heterogeneity in outcomes to the big 5 at the beginning of the pandemic, looking at the period at the end of March, beginning of April. But we also perform longitudinal analysis studying heterogeneity in changes in outcomes over time and relate that to differences in personality traits. Let me show you some results. I'm going to show you first results that refer to the beginning of the pandemic. So again, this is the period end of March, beginning of April. And I'm going to show you regression coefficients from multivariate regressions where we control for a wide range of demographic variables. And then we add the big 5 personality traits scores, but standardized, so you can compare the magnitude of these effects. Let's start with risk perceptions, the risk of getting infected or running out of money. As you can see, there is a strong positive correlation between neuroticism and risk perception. So people who score high in neuroticism feel a higher risk of getting infected and also running out of money. The risk of economic problems is also shared by people with higher openness, extraversion, and agreeableness. But in contrast, people who score high in conscientiousness feel that there is a lower risk of running out of money. When it comes to protective behavior, I'm focusing just on 2 outcomes here, wearing masks and avoiding high-risk individuals. We see something that is in line with some of the theoretical priors that I mentioned before, in the sense that people who score high in openness, extraversion, and agreeableness are more likely to adopt protective behaviors. We don't see a clear pattern for neuroticism, which may point to a little bit of a disconnect. Individuals with high neuroticism feel a higher risk of getting infected, yet they don't seem to act accordingly when it comes to protective behavior. In terms of coping behavior, we look at whether people have made time to relax in the past 7 days or have made time to make social connections. You see something that is, again, in line with expectations. Individuals who score high in neuroticism find less time to relax, and individuals who score high in openness, extraversion, and agreeableness are more likely to make social connections. Let's now focus on mental health. We use the PHQ-4 score, so a higher score means worse mental health. Here again, I'm showing you the snapshot at the beginning of the pandemic, and when you run these regressions, you see a strong and positive correlation between neuroticism and worse mental health. You see it very clearly here on the right, where we run a regression including indicators for the fourth quartiles of the neuroticism score, while controlling for the other personality traits. And you see a very steep gradient. So the higher the degree of neuroticism, the worse the mental health. Now, of course, this picture doesn't really tell you whether there was a differential response of people with different degree of neuroticism to the events of the pandemic. To shed light on this, we rely on the longitudinal dimension of the data. Unfortunately, we don't have the PHQ-4 score before the pandemic, so we cannot really do a before and after analysis, but we follow people over time. So I can show you how the PHQ score evolved over time for two groups, those with below median neuroticism and those with above median neuroticism. If you look at this picture, you see, of course, that these two groups start from very different levels. That's not a novelty. And in May, which is the first point on the graph, for both groups, mental health was worse. But then it improved over time, which is something that Ari was mentioning before. Now, if you think that towards the months of July and August, mental health has sort of reverted to the mean or went back to the previous level because people got used to the situation or the situation improved, you can see here that the jump in the beginning compared to the steady state was much larger for people with higher neuroticism. And you see it clearly when you look at the coefficients of a regression where you now interact the indicator for high neuroticism with months fixed effects. All the interaction coefficients which I'm showing here are negative and statistically significant, showing or indicating that people with high neuroticism improved mental health relatively more compared to people with low neuroticism. So just to conclude, we find evidence of differential responses to the pandemic by personality traits. We will explore heterogeneity in these responses by demographics. We are looking for outcomes observed before the pandemic, so we can do a before and after analysis and add additional insights. But importantly, as the COVID-19 crisis continues and new waves of data are collected, we will be able to document differential responses to an ever-changing environment. Thank you.